Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Riley Lewis Show. I am your host, Riley Lewis. As always, I'm delighted to see you. Welcome back. I hope you're having a good day and a good weekend, a restful one. Joining me today is a very interesting guest and a very good friend of mine that I've known for some time, who's been on the show multiple times. But in case you're not familiar, Mr. Antonio Giusto, introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. For those of you who may not know at this point, my name's Antonio, and Riley and I, we go back about 2 years. What would you say is approximately 2 years now? Almost three?
Longer. Yeah, at least three. I think we met in 2017 or maybe early 2018.
Yeah, I think it was early 2018.
Spring maybe of 2018, and now
Yeah,
it's
we were in that
2020.
Latin America class or something,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, so it's been a little over 2 years now.
Yeah, and we essentially just kind of hit it off through a similar idea on what the political climate on our college campus was like.
Absolutely.
And I just went from there, and now 2 years later, I'm with this gentleman on his new show.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of that. So we could just jump right in with what we were talking about before, with what's going on college campuses a little bit. This is something I've talked about in my own episodes, so I'd like to bring this idea to the table here for this discussion. But I think there's an interesting sort of almost like religious Puritan kind of characteristic that we're seeing in contemporary politics. I've never seen so much division around things like wearing or not wearing a mask, um, voting for the Iraq War or not voting for the Iraq War. I mean, we have, in many ways, unlike several other comparable countries, we have some tender, hot topic issues here that I'm not really sure how we resolve them, but I think many of these issues are brought to light or manufactured in some cases on college campuses. That's really, I think, where a lot of this goes back to. And maybe you could talk about your experience, but one thing I noticed, especially during 2016, was just how easily influenced people are. People, I think, put conformity before integrity. And I think that's part of the problem. I think there's a biological aspect to this where we put conformity above integrity. And I think that people will comply with certain flavors of our politics today in order to feel like they belong instead of taking a stand where they feel like it's absurd. Is
Yeah, I
that
never
about right?
understood. Yeah, I never really understood that, and you and I were both in political science as well, and I just never really understood why people see the modern voting process as just a, basically a team player match. What happened to just liking what you like, voting for that, or maybe something you disagree with, you don't vote for that. Where I just don't get how it out of nowhere suddenly became like, oh, you're an evil person if you don't vote this way, or you're heartless if you don't wear a mask and you want to kill grandma, which
Well, I mean,
experience
yeah,
firsthand.
absolutely. So, and we see this sort of this brand in many other areas. So, if you're comfortable with this, let's talk about. I apologize.
I wonder who.
So let's talk about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh my god.
So there are a few things going on, right? Number one, there's an obvious statement that no one
Yeah.
could ever disagree with, which is that Black Lives Matter. Insert
Yeah.
anything lives matter, right?
Of
And
course.
so you'd have to really not be a humanist or be really, like the textbook definition of someone who is a bigot to think that an obvious statement like that is untrue. But that's not the only thing that they want you to believe when you adopt that movement. There's something greater that is surrounding the movement that is much more than the obvious statement, Black Lives Matter. And we're seeing this in places like Chaz or Chop, where you have, in some ways, a media and elite sponsored Maoist takeover of parts of Seattle, and the police don't do anything. This is not an idea that really even necessarily originates with me. Brett Weinstein has talked so much about this, and I encourage people to listen to his podcast, Dark Horse. But we're literally seeing an elite sponsored, media condoned Maoist coup
Basically a coup, yeah.
going on. And this,
Yeah, I say
and this mindset, I think, is in many cases starting in academic circles. And I say this as someone who's on the inside, right? I mean, I'm about to start a master's program. I'm on the inside. I read these academic papers. I've become quite familiar with the extra, curricular work of even my old professors, and I know a lot of the lingo, and I can see the patterns, and I'm not the only one noticing these things. So, for you, I mean, you could answer this for me, but how is it that we're supposed to build up a society on the idea of destruction?
Well, this isn't really. It stopped being about George Floyd a long time ago. Now when you mention George Floyd, I'm sure a lot of people, just the regular, like the default liberals or the default conservatives, they've probably forgotten about that at this point. And when they hear about Black Lives Matter now, they think of the self-proclaimed trained Marxists who are trying to tear down statues, create autonomous zones, and funny enough, we're now seeing one in New York City called Abolition Park, and it's going about as well as you'd expect it to. And with these politicians and governors, which there's no way to sugarcoat this, it's happening in the liberal cities only. From what I've seen, no conservative areas are like this. I think there's a couple things here. One, they just want to stick it to the Trump administration because we were going on about this a few days ago. The modern far leftist progressive type, it appears that the worst thing they can do is admit that they were wrong and Trump was right. And I'm actually
We can talk about that, by the way. Sorry, that just reminds me about apologies. There's something about people not wanting to apologize, and the reason is when you apologize to someone, you're admitting that there is a debt. The same way people don't literally like to imagine themselves in financial debt. When you say I am sorry to someone, it is because you feel that you are in debt to them. Maybe you have done them wrong in some way, and you feel bad. You apologize. That's you recognizing that there's a debt, that something is not at equilibrium. And that's something that most people do not want to do because that requires you to ignore the automatic thought, which is to complain, and stay with the higher self realization that maybe in fact it is you. And people, it's just there's something about the inward reflection of that people don't tend to want to do, especially in politics. They would rather double down on whatever it is that they said in the first place instead of admitting that, like any other person, they're fallible.
Yeah, I mean, look at how it went down. Look at how having to double down on everything went down in back when C-19 first came around. Yeah. Remember? Do you know how many days ago it has been since we were told it was going to be just 15 days to flatten the curve? About 112 days ago now. Absolutely. And we were going on about this previously. It takes some serious self-reflection, some serious stones to admit that you were the one who was wrong and to apologize to somebody.
Right. Absolutely.
And I don't really see that these days with our governors. I think they, instead of just admitting that, hey, the Progressive Party isn't perfect, we have our flaws like literally every human being who's ever existed, and we don't want to prove Trump right, so we're just going to do all these different wacky measures to try and make ourselves, basically we're going to try and eventually make it a full 360 to where it started by putting in so many different extraneous variables to try and get it back to that where we started.
Absolutely. I was going to say, let me come in as someone. Let me just come in from a different angle here. So
Sure.
if you're someone, because this is what I think is going on for many people. If you are someone who wants someone else to be elected in November, then you have to be thinking, how dare the Democratic Party put us in a position of either voting for Joe Biden or not getting what we want?
I'm sorry. That's
And
just yeah.
that's something Eric Weinstein, Brett's brother, has talked about a ton. But I think that's what a lot of Democrats are feeling. Like, and even some of the revolutionary ones, I think the feeling is, how dare the Democratic Party do this to us twice? Where they give us some establishment status quo candidate who doesn't have, like, any sense of a new, fresh ideology,
And
but
very
instead,
obviously have
right,
Alzheimer's.
a corporate person who's going to be beholden to corporate interests.
Yep,
So
pretty
there are a
much.
lot of people who are very upset because they're probably feeling like, how dare the party do this to us? And that's, again, if you're coming in from the
Yeah,
angle that you do not want Trump in office. If you want Trump in office, you're probably quite happy with what's going on right now because it's utter madness. And I really find it I would find it difficult to imagine a situation in which people look at what's going on in 2020 and they're eager to run out to the polls to vote, period, but to vote for a party that crushed the economy and then says that we need to, open it up or we need stimulus, but then when a protests go on, we don't mention the masks or anything. We can't ask about it when we're doing testing now. There's a lot of politics, and I think that people are going to think that the economy was good until the government forced it to stop, and they're going to be upset about that, and that's probably going to be a huge motivator in November. I might be wrong.
oh, absolutely. And one upside to all that is no matter which way you spin it, we are going to have unprecedented turnout unlike anything we've ever seen before. But regarding
Do you
the
believe that?
protest, how,
Do you believe that?
hmm?
Do
Yes, I do
you
actually.
think that we'll have like unprecedented turnout, like historic
I
turnout?
believe we will. But it's unfortunately going to be comprised almost entirely of people who either want to get Trump out or keep Biden from getting in. And I don't think there's going to be much medium on that. I could be wrong, though. Hopefully, I am because the voting process is a wonderful thing. But as it currently stands, I think that's how it's going to that's going to be the primary motivator in the coastal states on both sides. It's going to be let's get Trump out. And in Middle America, we're going to see we have to either keep him in or we're going to fall to communism. You remember that electoral college map I showed you? That was essentially my own prediction of it.
Totally, yeah.
I think the final
So
score
yeah,
is going to be.
let's talk about that. Could you
Sure.
explain your model generally for people and explain why you think swing states are going to swing red? I'm fascinated by that prediction. I'd love to hear what you're thinking as far as the behavior of swing states before November. Why do you think that's
Oh,
going to
sure.
happen?
Any ones in particular you'd like to hear? Maybe Pennsylvania or
Florida,
Florida?
Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin. These are the states. West Virginia. These are states that
Okay.
I care about.
Okay. So
Florida as well.
starting with, I'll start with Florida. All right. So Florida, there was of course a while back when Bernie Sanders he supported the Castro regime, and
Okay.
a lot of Cubans are in Florida because they did flee communism, and for the Democrat Party to condone that community in particular, I don't think is going to forget it. And on top of that, we, much like pretty much every state, we had riots everywhere. And the Democrat politicians were the ones who refused to stop it. And on top of that, Governor Ron DeSantis, you probably saw this on the news recently. He said, we're not going to reclose anything down because that would cripple our economy. And irrespective of how we respond to viruses, we do like to work. And what we saw over the past 112 approximately days is that the overwhelming majority of us were unfortunately unable to work. Fortunately, I was not one such person, but there were many people I knew who were like that.
And for many people around the world, we can't afford another shutdown. That's
exactly.
I was talking to someone about this earlier, and we both sort of came to this conclusion after reading some articles that at the end of the day, you really do in your daily life anyway, you're making risk calculation all day long. Am I willing to risk my life to drive a car? Am I willing to risk my life to have a beer? Am I willing to risk my life to get on an airplane? Am I willing to risk my life to eat food or to have a child or to like there are a lot of things where you're putting yourself at potential risk statistically. But we don't ban cars or having children or flying in planes or drinking alcohol. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to figure out a way to keep businesses going because we have people that were just recovering from 2008 who got squashed, who are on
Yeah,
their last legs as we speak, who will go out of business permanently if another shutdown happens.
yeah,
And
and
we just can't afford it. We just can't. I wish we could afford to take 3 weeks off, all of us, and have a staycation and just
majority of us do
let
not have that
this thing
luxury.
die out and in the heat and move on. But we can't afford it. We just
Yeah,
can't afford that.
yeah. I was reading in some places 40% of small businesses are estimated to never open up again.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
And
a lot of people are just recovering from 2008, and they're
yeah, and what's going to happen to those poor people who gave everything to run a small business? Are they just going to, what are they going to do? Are
tell
they
you what
just going
happens.
to? Hmm,
You take a second mortgage on your house and you lose all of your retirement funds. You
that's
burn
a
through
yeah,
you burn through your pension, your retirement, your 401k, and then you take out a
that's a
second mortgage
horrible
on
way
your
to
house.
go. That's a horrible way to go. We can't have
It is a
that.
terrible way to go.
For those who, you remember some instructors at Sonoma State. I don't need to name drop them, but there was one in particular who had to be close to 80 at the time, and there was another one I had for a winter session course. She was in her mid 80s, still going at it, and
Who's
is
that? I don't know if I'm familiar with that one.
yeah, that one was outside of our field,
That
but
makes sense.
nobody wants that for themselves. They don't want to work until the day they pass. I mean, I appreciate the dedication, but there's not too many people who do that out of their own conscious choice. It's usually because they have to.
Yeah. Well, so
And
yeah. Well,
I'm sorry,
I want to get back to 2016 because I really want to
sure.
just keep going with this theme.
Okay.
We actually started with college campuses and we sort of missed the whole idea there with the postmodern movement that really is turning into these Maoist revolutions that we're seeing in the
I will.
streets. But that said, let's talk about 2016.
Okay.
I would love to hear, just for the record, again, just to refresh me, sort of your interpretation of what's going on in America leading up to the election of 2016. People always
Well,
say, why did we vote this way or whatever, or why did so many people vote for Trump? I would love to hear someone come in and give some reasons to explain the context in which somebody would be eager to vote for President Trump.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So the
go
biggest
ahead.
one I saw back in 2016 was that many of us were just so tired of all the postmodern Marxist PC stuff that we see
Right.
in the media, on TV shows, on college campuses, in the big cities everywhere. And Hillary Clinton was just an extension of that. And here comes Donald Trump, the antithesis to all that, who was all about getting our borders secure again and about just not caving in to what the media was saying about him or what anybody regarding PC culture was like with him. He was just the antithesis to all that, and he represented basically the average American in that he was all about getting the economy up again because the economy at that point was in shambles. And funny enough, right now it's even higher than the former administration's high point. So that says a lot about the
It does.
differences in how the country was run.
It does.
And And he spoke to a lot of people who were not for all this and not about having to pay reparations to black people just on the basis of your skin color or having to apologize for being Christian or anything like that. And he just came along and was the antithesis to all that. And how did the other side respond? They proceeded to just double down on buzzwords, and that just kind of solidified it for all of us.
I mean, I do also want to point out a third of the country decided not to vote. So it solidified it for a third of the country. The other third for Clinton, and then the other third just didn't vote.
Yeah,
So,
regarding that.
if we have more people turn out this time, I'm wondering if it'll go the same way, and that's why I would like to hear about your models. So we've heard a little bit about Florida. Maybe talk about Ohio now or Pennsylvania. What do you think is going on in Pennsylvania that would create a situation that would go red?
So Pennsylvania in particular, that one, I kind of made that prediction back with a comment Biden made to the coal workers union in Iowa. They were asking him, it went something along the lines of, they were asking him, what are you going to do about, our jobs that you want to take away? Because you probably remember that one Democrat he had, where he said, I would be willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of jobs if it meant fighting climate change.
Right.
So the way it went was these coal workers were asking him, hey, what about us? He said, more or less, learn the code. Right. So he was so out of touch, even then, with the average American, that he just expected a mid-50s coal worker to just pick up a laptop and have the same learning proficiency as an 18-year-old. And to my understanding, Pennsylvania is much of the same. There's your cousin Jack. He works alongside the trades unions as well, if I'm not mistaken. And from what I've seen, much of Pennsylvania is like that too. And I don't think they're going to forget that it was a Democrat Party who was willing to sacrifice their own jobs for something that we, quite frankly, don't have as much control over as we tend to think we do.
No, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. So let me ask you this then. How important do you think Biden's choice for the VP is? How much weight goes behind that? There's certainly going to be people who either decide not to vote for him or do vote for him, I think, based on his VP pick.
Yeah, his cognitive decline is undeniable. No matter how much people try to sweep it under the rug, the poor man, he is not doing too well mentally. So we all know, everybody knows that the VP is going to be the one calling all the shots. And that's why it has taken this long to find one, because they want to make sure their VP will be the best fit for being the one calling all the shots, while Biden is essentially just the announcer for the new measures.
I think that's true, but I also think that what's going on is that they're having a tough time because they have to find someone who they can count on to be beholden to corporate interests, but who will also satisfy some of the more progressive revolutionaries, right? So I think that part of it is also satisfying your own party, and that's why it's taking so long. I also think that's why it took so long to get to a nominee, just generally, period. Yeah. We went through a long process just to get to who was deemed the inevitable choice from the beginning, Joe Biden. Journalists have been saying this from the start of the debate season. It's just going to go to Joe Biden.
Yeah, and
we had a whole long debate season and a whole lot of theater pretending that it wouldn't be Biden.
Essentially, just
it was always going to be Biden.
Yep. Essentially, just
malleable. Right, he's malleable. So what do you do if you're someone who doesn't? I guess at some point, if I were to play as someone on the other side, if you're someone who again wants someone different in office, but Joe Biden is the nominee, how important is the VP pick?
It's going to be.
Is it pretty important?
I'd say yes, it's pretty important.
Who do you think it's going to be? What do you think about? Do you think it's going to be? What's her name from Georgia?
Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, do you think it's going to be Stacey Abrams?
I would say as of right now, it's going to be a black woman for sure to try and get that not intersectionality, but the inclusive angle covered.
Yep.
I think more likely it's going to be Harris.
Oh, really?
I think
they had the little squabble on stage. You think he
Yeah,
would pick Kamala? Really?
I think
Why?
so. Yeah.
Why?
Well, because and she's from the Bay.
Yeah.
She's from California. Even though her her job out here was kind of questionable, how well she did, she is very well decorated in terms of her credentials, and she does speak well considering she was a prosecutor. So I think she's gonna be good for trying to. And I can't believe I'm saying this. I think she's going to be good for kind of covering the the black voter base angle. She'll be good for covering that, but at the same time, she's also just corporatist enough to where she'll appeal to moderate Democrats as well.
Right. That's fair. That's actually quite smart. I actually think that's a very good point because she is. That's the thing that would satisfy both wings of the party. Someone who appears to be a fresh face, but really as a in some ways as a Trojan horse,
And
in
on top
addition
of
to
that,
just satisfying corporations. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, there was just one other thing that just popped up in my mind now about Harris as well, and why I think she's going to be a good pick too. When it came to the social issue, she was essentially a progressive. So
Right.
even though a lot of people did see through it as just a way to try and get more votes in, I think that it to some extent does cover the modern progressive angle as
Of
well.
course. Of course.
I think Abrams is too new, and she still hasn't gotten over Georgia. I think that she's going to be needing a bit more time in the political field first before
Right.
ever getting into any of those other positions.
Okay. And now one other question I want to ask you before we take our break, and then we
Mm-hmm.
will be just taking a quick break, and then we'll come right back with our part 2 of today's episode. So please stay tuned. But first, which actually I should say our part 2 will be released the next day after this the publication of this episode, but at the same time the following day. So please stay tuned for that this week. But so one last thing I want to ask you: Why do you think why do you think there was an absence of any candidate that was attractive enough to overcome Joe Biden? Why do you think that Biden was the inevitable choice that was made?
I would say probably the biggest one is that he just represents the Barry administration. He's kind of the relic of when they believed America to be at its peak, and
Right.
they think that he will be able to bring us back to that point again.
I mean, ironically, a lot of people. I don't think Obama would be nearly as popular as he was in 2008. You can
Yeah,
even
it's
see you can see very noticeable discrepancies even between the way he talks and his wife talks. A few weeks ago, there were two articles in the Washington Post on the front page, one by Barack Obama, one by Michelle Obama. Now, Michelle Obama's article, the headline said basically, hold on to your anger. Obama's headline said something to the effect of new strategies for new problems in the 21st century or something. And you could just tell that there was a very big difference in the
yeah.
mindset between even Obama and his wife. So I think that if Barack Obama ran today on this idea of I'm proud to be running for president in America, which is something he said in 2007 on the record, I'm proud to be running here, I think that people would say why in the Democratic Party and that it would not be popular because that's what something like
Probably.
Andrew Yang said. Andrew Yang is literally the descendant of immigrants who's running for president, and that wasn't diverse enough for people.
He was their diversity
I
poster boy.
know,
He had every single angle covered.
I know, and we settled on Scranton Joe, which look, I think he's a nice guy. I don't think he's capable of handling the job with his current state, but I think that it's going to be a close race either way. In any case, I want to wrap up part 1 here and take a quick break, and then we'll jump into part 2. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening to part 1 of today's episode of The Riley Lewis Show. If you like my content and you want to support me, please hit that subscribe button down below. It greatly helps me out. You can also like this video or leave me a comment in the comment section down below and let me know how I'm doing. You'll also find a link in the description of this video to my Patreon page where you can sign up, become a member, and make a donation. I'm also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Breaker. Okay, thank you so much, Antonio.
Thank you for having me.